Day 3, Cassie Ventura's harrowing testimony grips the courtroom. The third day of Sean Diddy Combs' federal sex trafficking and racketeering trial was dominated by the emotional thriller-like testimony of singer Cassandra Cassie Ventura, Combs' former girlfriend and the prosecution's star witness. 8 months pregnant and visibly resolute, Cassie returned to the stand Wednesday morning to continue recounting the decade of abuse she endured during her on and off relationship with the hip-hop mogul. The atmosphere in the Manhattan courtroom was tense and expectant. Spectators, journalists, and even jurors braced themselves for the next chapter of Cassie's story after a prior day of graphic revelations. Combs sat at the defense table in a cream-colored sweater, flanked by his attorneys and occasionally glancing toward his former partner on the stand. By day's end, Cassie's account would leave the courtroom in stunned silence, painting a chilling portrait of alleged sexual brutality, violence, and control. Morning, revisiting the 2016 hotel assault, proceedings resumed shortly after 10 a.m. with Assistant U.S. Attorney Emily Johnson gently guiding Cassie back to one of the flashpoints of her abuse, a violent incident at Los Angeles' Intercontinental Hotel in March 2016. The prosecution dimmed the lights and played a grainy surveillance video from that night on large courtroom monitors. In the video, a woman identified as Cassie is seen sprinting down a hotel hallway in fear, while a man clad only in a towel, Combs, chases her, then punches and kicks her to the floor before attempting to drag her back toward their suite. The courtroom fell silent except for the hum of the video. Several jurors leaned forward intently, their faces etched with shock. Cassie kept her eyes on the screen, one hand pressed to her midsection as if steadying herself. When the lights came up, Cassie testified about what the jury had just witnessed. "He was yelling at me and then threw a vase at me," she said, voice trembling but clear. She recalled ducking as a glass vase shattered against the hallway wall, barely missing her. "I didn't get hit. I remember it hitting the wall," Cassie explained, describing how Combs was enraged that she had tried to flee their room. According to Cassie, Combs screamed at her that she wasn't going to leave him that night, that she couldn't leave. In the video, his fury was unmistakable. Next, prosecutors showed the jury 2 photographs Cassie had taken of herself immediately after that hotel altercation. In these selfies, snapped during her panicked Uber ride away from the hotel, Cassie's lip is swollen and split, and she's wearing oversized dark sunglasses, which she testified concealed a black eye that makeup couldn't fully cover. Cassie gently touched the bruise under her eye as she identified the photos, explaining that one image showed her injury peeking out beneath the shades. A sympathetic murmur rippled through the courtroom gallery. The prosecution also introduced text messages exchanged between Cassie and Combs later that night. On the large screen, jurors read Cassie's message to Combs. "You're sick for thinking it's okay to do what you did to me," she wrote, also informing him. Cassie confirmed she sent those words confronting Combs via text in the hours after fleeing. Combs' reply, not fully read aloud in court, was dismissive and cold according to Cassie's testimony. She told the court that instead of apologizing, Combs responded in a way that made her feel he didn't care at all about her injuries, even as she sent him photographic proof of the damage. Cassie then revealed something she had never publicly shared before. A close friend, horrified by her condition that night, called the police. When officers arrived at Cassie's home, however, she refused to name her assailant. "In that moment, I didn't want to hurt him that way. I wasn't ready," she testified quietly, wiping a tear. The police left, and Cassie stayed silent, a decision born of a decade of psychological hold Combs had over her. The jury appeared to register the profound conflict she must have felt. Even after such violence, Cassie's instinct was to protect the man who hurt her. This 2016 hotel incident, now backed by visceral video and photographic evidence, set the tone for day 3. It illustrated in microcosm the cycle Cassie described, an explosive burst of violence followed by silence and concealment. As one legal commentator observed outside the courtroom, that video is worth 1,000 words. And Cassie's words make it even more powerful. Indeed, seeing the brutal footage and hearing Cassie's first-hand account in tandem clearly rattled the jury. One juror swallowed hard and another visibly jerked his head back when the graphic still images from the video were displayed. The impact of this evidence was unmistakable, and the day was only beginning. The freakoffs, a disturbing pattern of sexual abuse. With the courtroom still absorbing the 2016 assault, Prosecutor Johnson shifted focus to a core allegation in the case: the notorious freakoffs. Cassie had begun describing these on Tuesday. Now she delved even deeper, providing the jury a nightmarish tour of Combs's twisted sexual demands over the years. She testified that Combs regularly forced her to organize and participate in what he called freakoffs, essentially drug-fueled sex parties involving male prostitutes, and Cassie staged for Combs's voyeuristic pleasure. It basically entails the hiring of an escort and setting up this experience so that I could perform for Sean, Cassie explained, her voice steady but tinged with disgust. Combs, she said, controlled the whole situation. He would direct the sex acts like a choreographer, telling Cassie and the escort what to do while he watched, filmed, and often joined in abusing her. It was his fantasy, Cassie added flatly. Eventually it became a job for me, pretty much. Over the course of their relationship, these freakoffs went from an occasional kink to an almost routine ordeal. Cassie recalled that Combs introduced the concept within the first year of their relationship. Her first freakoff was around 2008 when she was just 22. From then on, they happened nearly every week in various cities and luxury hotels around the world: New York, Los Angeles, Miami, Las Vegas, even overseas in places like Ibiza and Turks and Caicos. Cassie lost count of how many took place. It's impossible to know, she said when asked for a number, but conceded it was in the hundreds. For each freakoff, Cassie was tasked with finding and procuring the male sex partners, a deeply humiliating responsibility. She described scrolling through Craigslist and Backpage ads under Combs's direction to select escorts, and later using a service called Cowboys for Angels to book men who met Combs's specifications. Combs provided the cash, typically $1,500 to $6,000 per encounter, which Cassie would hand off to the escorts at his instruction. He spared no expense in engineering these sessions. Drugs were always part of the package, Cassie recounted. Combs would supply ecstasy, cocaine, marijuana, ketamine, mushrooms, whatever substances were needed to fuel marathon sessions that could last 2 to 3 days straight without sleep. Cassie herself admitted she never participated sober. I would ingest drugs at every freak-off, she said, explaining that the narcotics, often ketamine, helped her dissociate and numb herself to the trauma. Ketamine, a dissociative anesthetic, became her crutch because it was very dissociative. It made me feel not present, she noted, allowing her to endure the degrading acts Combs demanded. Cassie's testimony painted each freak-off as a carefully scripted depravity. She described how Combs would dictate even the smallest details, what she should wear, how she should groom herself. He insisted her nails always be painted white, her hair styled to his liking, and what specific sexual acts she had to perform. If she dared to hesitate or refuse, violence was not just a possibility, it was a certainty. I felt like I couldn't say no, Cassie said. I didn't want to make him upset. I didn't know what no could turn into. Saying no often led to a beating, so she learned to comply at all costs. In one chilling aside, Cassie testified that if she even looked reluctant, Combs's eyes would go black with rage. The version of him I was in love with was no longer there, she said. Even by the standards of these disturbing encounters, some freak-offs veered into truly grotesque territory. Cassie bravely recounted one incident, voice cracking in humiliation, when Combs directed an escort to urinate on her while she was pinned down despite her protests. I just felt humiliated. It was disgusting. It was too much, she testified, describing how she began to choke as the man urinated on her face. Seeing her distress, Cassie at one point raised her hands in a silent plea for mercy. Only then did Combs signal the man to stop. I was choking. There was too much urine in my mouth, she said, her voice wavering with remembered disgust. Sean urinated on me at the same time, she added, grimacing. The jury looked aghast. A few people in the gallery covered their mouths, and one of Combs's own family members in the audience shut her eyes and shook her head. Throughout this portion of testimony, Cassie emphasized how these forced trysts made her feel utterly degraded and worthless. Horrible, humiliated, worthless were the words she repeated, describing her mental state during and after freakoffs. "It felt like all I was good for," she said in a flat tone that barely masked her pain. I was heavily objectified," Cassie stated, looking directly at the defense table where Combs avoided her gaze. When these marathon sessions finally ended, she would often collapse into a ball of shame. "Empty." She said of how she felt emotionally afterward, and gross. Sometimes she would flee the hotel room in the middle of a freak-off because she felt unsafe running out half-dressed into hallways or parking lots. But inevitably, Combs' security team would find her and bring her back. "Whatever was going to not make him angry or threaten me, I was going to do," Cassie explained of why she would return despite her terror. The cycle of domination was complete. No escape, not even when she tried. Supporting Cassie's account, prosecutors presented screenshots from videos that Combs himself had recorded during various freak-offs. The court learned that Combs kept an archive of these explicit videos on his phone and devices, a trove of potential blackmail. Cassie begged him to delete the recordings, especially those stored on her own phone, which he sometimes used as a second camera, and he would lie that he had erased them, but inevitably she discovered the video still on his device later. He would also threaten to release the videos, Cassie testified, hands twisting nervously. She recounted a birthday gathering one year where she wanted to stay with her friends instead of rushing off to yet another freak-off. Combs leaned in and reminded her of what he had on his phone, all those videos of her in compromising acts. The implicit threat was clear, and it worked. Cassie left her own celebration to do Combs' bidding. He said releasing the videos would ruin everything I had worked for, make me look like a slut, that I would be shamed, Cassie testified, her voice breaking for the first time that morning. "Nobody should do that to anyone," she added, a flash of anger in her eyes amid the tears. Members of the jury nodded almost imperceptibly, as if agreeing with her. Cassie's harrowing depictions of the freak-off spanned a good portion of the morning. Prosecutors bolstered her testimony with corroborating evidence. 7 still-frame images extracted from seized freak-off videos were shown privately to the jury, with the press and public excluded due to their graphic nature. Those who saw the images described them as extremely explicit and disturbing. Cassie and various unidentified men engaged in sexual acts, sometimes with visible signs of her distress. One juror covered her mouth in shock, and another wiped his forehead as if sweating. The judge noted for the record that jurors appeared visibly affected by the photos. These images, combined with Cassie's calm yet heart-wrenching narration, painted a portrait of systematic sexual exploitation that would be hard for the defense to characterize as consensual, kinky fun, as Combs' attorneys had insinuated in opening statements. Indeed, by late morning, the courtroom felt the weight of Cassie's trauma. Even seasoned court officers looked unsettled. Cassie herself remained composed under questioning, though her eyes reddened with tears when describing the most appalling abuses. Every so often, she paused to take a deep breath or dab at her eyes with a tissue, her free hand resting on her swollen belly for comfort. Through it all, Combs watched largely without outward emotion. An observer might think him unmoved, but those close enough could see his jaw clench tighter with each damning detail. Violence and control beyond the freak-offs. After a brief recess to allow everyone to regroup, the prosecution steered Cassie's testimony toward the broader pattern of violence and control in her relationship with Combs. It wasn't only during freak-off sessions that she suffered. The abuse permeated every aspect of her life with him. Cassie testified that violent arguments were common throughout their years together, and they usually result in some sort of physical abuse, such as Combs dragging her by the hair or kicking her during fights. When asked how often Combs got physical with her, Cassie sighed and answered, "Too frequently." She offered one memorable incident from 2013 as an example. Cassie was at her Los Angeles apartment with 2 close female friends when Combs unexpectedly showed up, something he often did given he had a key to her home. An argument erupted. Triggered, Cassie said, by Combs's jealousy and paranoia over who she spent time with, it escalated fast. "He tried to attack me," Cassie testified. Seeing Cassie in danger, her two friends literally jumped on Combs's back to restrain him. The courtroom gallery gasped softly at this image, two average young women grappling with a powerful music mogul in defense of their friend. In response, Combs threw Cassie off of him with such force that she hit a piece of furniture. "He tossed me and I hit my head on the corner of the bed frame," Cassie said, touching her eyebrow. The impact split her eyebrow open, blood streaming down her face. Realizing she was badly hurt, Combs seemed to snap out of his rage momentarily. According to Cassie, he rushed her to a plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills that same day, where she received stitches to close the wound. Later, once the injury had been treated, Cassie did something striking. She texted Combs a photo of her stitched up brow with a message, "So you can remember." On the stand, Cassie explained why. "I wanted him to see what he'd done, to never forget," she said quietly. Combs' reaction, however, was chilling. Cassie testified that he was dismissive of the photo and blamed her for provoking him, saying only, "You don't know when to stop. You have pushed it too far and continue to push, sad." The prosecution had her read aloud that curt reply from a text exchange, each staccato sentence fragment dripping with Combs' cold anger. It was a stark illustration of the gaslighting Cassie says she endured. Even with photographic evidence of her injury, Combs minimized the abuse and implied it was her fault. Cassie detailed how fighting back often made things worse. If she ever hit back in self-defense, it might momentarily startle Combs, but usually only made him more violent, made him stronger, make him want to push me harder, she said. In a rare concession, Cassie acknowledged that on a couple of occasions she initiated physical fights, likely out of pent-up frustration or desperation, but she testified, "I didn't see any injuries on him as a result." By contrast, her own body bore countless scars and bruises from Combs' attacks over the years. Prosecutors introduced a set of photographs taken by Cassie's mother in 2011 after one particularly brutal beating. The images shown to jurors depicted large purple bruises on Cassie's back and legs, injuries from Combs kicking her. Cassie's mother had documented those wounds when Cassie fled to her family home in Connecticut to recover. Seeing those old photos now, Cassie's eyes welled up. "That was me after he kicked me," she said softly as jurors studied the painful evidence. The jury also heard that multiple Bad Boy Entertainment employees witnessed Combs' violence toward Cassie. His security team, management, assistants, a lot of them saw, Cassie testified. In fact, one longtime personal assistant of Combs eventually quit because of how intolerable the abuse had become. Cassie recalled that assistant telling her, "I can't watch what he does to you anymore," before leaving the job. And this was a critical point for the prosecution. It showed that even Combs' inner circle was disturbed by his behavior, bolstering Cassie's credibility. Prosecutors hinted that some of those employees will testify later in the trial, corroborating Cassie's accounts. Cassie further described Combs' propensity for violence against others in his orbit, not just her. He would assault some of his employees, male and female. She told the court, adding that she had seen him punch male staffers and violently shove female assistants against walls. He even attacked her friends on occasion. Cassie recounted a terrifying night in Las Vegas in 2015, previously detailed on day 2. She spoke briefly with a well-known music manager at a club, which sent Combs into a jealous fury. He dragged her into a hotel bedroom and beat her so savagely that she was left with 2 black eyes, a busted lip, and a welt on her forehead. That was the beating after which Combs' own head of security cried at the sight of Cassie's injuries, and Combs forced her to cover the bruises with makeup so his son wouldn't see. Cassie's friends had been in an adjacent room that night. Her screams were drowned out by loud music, but when they saw her battered face afterward, one friend confronted Combs. In response, Combs grabbed that female friend and dangled her over the balcony of the 17th floor hotel suite, threatening to drop her. He had her entire body over the edge, Cassie recounted, her voice shaking at the memory. She and others begged him until he pulled the friend back to safety. "He'd do that. He'd terrorize people to scare me," Cassie said. One of the most unsettling themes in Cassie's testimony was how Combs isolated and controlled her through fear. He leveraged his wealth, influence, and even weapons to keep her in line. Cassie confirmed that Combs kept guns in multiple homes, often in unlocked safes or drawers, and she found their presence menacing. On multiple occasions, Combs forced Cassie to carry a firearm in her purse when he anticipated trouble. She told the court she genuinely believed she could be killed during some of these incidents, either by him or as a collateral damage in his beefs with others. Another act of intimidation Cassie revealed was startling. In early 2012, at the height of Combs' jealousy over her brief dalliance with rapper Kid Cudi, Combs told Cassie he would blow up Kid's car while Cudi and his friends were inside. Cassie took it as an empty threat at the time, but around that time, Kid Cudi's car did explode in his driveway under mysterious circumstances. The courtroom reacted with audible shock at this revelation. It was as if a scene from a crime thriller had come to life. Cassie said it was then she realized just how far Combs would go to harm anyone he perceived as crossing him. "I was terrified. I fully comprehended what he was capable of," she testified, suggesting this was not an idle anecdote. It underscored the racketeering aspect of the charges. Combs wasn't just an abusive boyfriend the government alleges, but the leader of a criminal enterprise that engaged in acts of violence, intimidation, and even arson. Cassie's testimony bridged the personal and the criminal, showing how Combs' abuse of her tied into broader illicit behavior. By mid-afternoon, the jury had heard about a litany of abuses: assaults leaving black eyes and split brows, death threats against rivals, forced gun possession, public beatings, coerced orgies, and psychological torture. Cassie, though visibly emotionally drained, showed remarkable resolve. At one point, the prosecutor asked how she survived years of this. Cassie glanced at the jurors and replied, "I was in love and wanted to make him happy, and I was afraid." Saying no felt impossible. In that simple statement, the jurors perhaps understood the tragic bind that trapped her: love, fear, and a decade of grooming and dependence. Afternoon, a final act of terror and breaking free. As the afternoon session began, the climax of Cassie's ordeal came into focus. The night in September 2018 when she says Combs raped her in her own home, the event that finally pushed her to escape for good. Cassie recounted this incident with a mix of sorrow and steely determination. By 2018, she testified she was desperate to end the toxic relationship once and for all. She had even started quietly planning her exit, recognizing that if I stayed with him, I would never be physically and mentally safe. In September of that year, Combs invited her to dinner at a high-end Italian restaurant in Malibu, ostensibly to discuss closure and amicably ending their relationship. Cassie agreed, hoping this could be a civilized conclusion to their long, dark saga. The dinner, she said, was tense, but uneventful. However, afterward, Combs insisted on accompanying Cassie back to her home, a luxury condo in Santa Monica that, notably, he was paying for at the time. Cassie allowed him inside, thinking perhaps they'd have a final talk and say goodbye. Instead, things took a horrific turn. Cassie's voice quavered as she described how Combs' demeanor changed once they were alone in her living room. He tried to kiss her, she recalled. "I told him to stop," Cassie said, "and I tried to push him away, but Combs didn't stop. In a flash, he grabbed Cassie and began tearing at her clothing." Cassie's eyes brimmed with tears as she relived the moment. "He pulled off my clothes, unbuckled his belt," she testified haltingly. She started crying on the stand but pressed on. "He proceeded to rape me on the floor while I kept saying no. I was crying, begging him," Cassie said, her voice barely above a whisper. Several jurors looked stricken. One shook his head in disbelief. Cassie described the rape as a blur of fear and pain, and notably fast. It was very fast. His eyes were black. He wasn't himself, she said through tears. Cassie then fell silent for a long moment, visibly working to compose herself. Judge Arun Subramanian offered to pause proceedings, but Cassie shook her head and indicated she could continue. In the front row, a courtroom sketch artist furiously sketched the scene. Cassie on the witness stand, face crumpled in grief as she recounted the rape, a tear rolling down her cheek. Combs sat rigidly at the defense table, staring down at his hands. In the aftermath of that rape, Cassie testified, something in her finally broke, or perhaps awoke. She realized she could no longer survive in Combs's world. Soon thereafter, I took steps to completely separate myself from my longtime abuser, she said firmly. Despite the trauma and danger, she mustered the courage to do what had seemed impossible before. She left. Cassie moved out of the home Combs had purchased for her and returned every last thing he had given her, including a fancy car. She cut off contact and went into hiding, at least for a while. In early 2019, however, Cassie faced a new scare. Her home address was mysteriously posted online, exposing her whereabouts and leaving her afraid that Combs or his associates might come after her. She relocated yet again and, under immense duress, took steps to formally disentangle her career from Combs. Cassie told the court she negotiated her release from her record deal with Bad Boy Entertainment, despite having multiple albums left on her contract. It was a costly decision, but essential for her freedom. In the months after the breakup, Cassie struggled with severe trauma. I had horrible flashbacks, she testified, nightmares. I started sleepwalking, having blackouts. She developed symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and sank into a deep depression. I didn't want to be alive, Cassie admitted in a raw moment, describing her mindset by the time she finally sought professional help. With the support of family and a new loved one, she entered an inpatient rehabilitation and trauma therapy program around 2019. That's when I first confronted the extent of the trauma I live with, she said. In therapy, Cassie had to detox from more than just psychological trauma. She also battled addictions to drugs and alcohol, habits she developed during her years with Combs as a way to cope. She told jurors that, except for the time she was pregnant, she had often been intoxicated to blunt her nightmares and panic attacks. It took intensive treatment, but by 2022, Cassie was able to get sober and stay sober, breaking the cycle of self-medication that Combs had long encouraged. A poignant bright spot emerged in her recovery: the birth of her children. Cassie has since had 2 children with her now husband, whom she met after leaving Combs, and is expecting a 3rd very soon. The birth of my kids gave me a new lease on life, she said, managing a small smile for the first time on the stand. They saved me from the trauma that consumed over a decade of my life. Becoming a mother, Cassie explained, motivated her to heal and to ensure the cycle stops with me. She no longer wanted to live in fear or shame. This personal growth set the stage for what came next: holding Sean Combs accountable in a court of law. I'm here to do the right thing, Cassie's resolve. As Cassie's direct examination drew to a close, Assistant U.S. Attorney Johnson asked one final crucial question: why are you testifying now? After all, Cassie had filed a civil lawsuit against Combs in November 2023, a lawsuit packed with these same allegations of rape, battery, and sex trafficking, but she agreed to settle that case just one day after filing it for a reported sum of $20 million. The defense had repeatedly hinted that Cassie took the money and ran. So why was she now testifying against Combs in a criminal trial, reliving all this trauma in public when she could have stayed silent? And Cassie's answer was delivered with quiet power. I can't carry this anymore, she said, looking straight at the jurors. I can't carry the shame, the guilt anymore, the way I was guided to treat people like they were disposable. She took a breath, her voice strengthening. Right is right and wrong is wrong. I am here to do the right thing. In that moment, the courtroom was utterly still. Cassie Ventura, who had been held down in the dark times by Combs' abuse for so long, was now standing up in the light for herself and, implicitly, for other survivors. Her words hung in the air, a declaration of reclaiming her voice. Even Judge Subramanian appeared moved. He paused before speaking, letting her statement resonate. The prosecutor had no further questions. Cassie had spent roughly 2 full days on the stand detailing the most intimate horrors of her life. As she stepped down, she visibly trembled with emotion. She had done it. She had told the truth to the world. Some spectators quietly began to applaud, quickly hushed by court officers. Combs watched her intently as she walked by, but Cassie did not look in his direction. She exited the courtroom with her head high, tears on her face, but a look of relief washing over her. Judge Subramanian adjourned the court for the day, noting that cross-examination by the defense would begin first thing Thursday morning. There was a collective exhale in the courtroom. Many realized they'd been holding their breath during Cassie's final testimony about why she chose to come forward. Public outrage and support erupts. Outside the federal courthouse on Pearl Street, crowds of supporters and onlookers had gathered despite the rainy evening. When Cassie emerged flanked by U.S. Marshals and her attorneys, a cheer went up from a cluster of young women holding a "We Stand with Cassie" banner. Cassie gave a brief wave and a grateful smile before being whisked into an SUV. Word of her testimony had already flooded social media and the news. Legal experts and commentators weighed in rapidly on what they'd heard in court. Former federal prosecutor Mitchell Anderson, interviewed on CNN, called Cassie's testimony one of the most powerful and disturbing accounts from a victim that I've ever seen on the stand. He noted that the extensive corroborating evidence, from text to photos to video, bolstered her credibility tremendously. It's devastating for the defense, Anderson said. The prosecution connected all the dots. A decade-long pattern of abuse, intimidation, and control corroborated by multiple sources. Any juror with a heart would be hard-pressed to see this as anything but a systematic victimization of Ms. Ventura. Defense attorneys who will cross-examine Cassie next have suggested Cassie is exaggerating or had freedom to leave, but the consensus among legal analysts is that her detailed testimony, delivered with raw emotion yet remarkable clarity, came across as highly credible. If even half of what she described is true, it establishes the core of the sex trafficking charge: force, fraud, or coercion to engage in sexual acts beyond a reasonable doubt, commented Professor Elaine Chen, a criminal law expert on Court TV. Public figures and celebrities also reacted, many voicing support for Cassie. Rapper 50 Cent, a longtime adversary of Diddy, took to Instagram and Twitter immediately. He shared the leaked 2016 CCTV hallway footage, which had surfaced online earlier in the trial, of Diddy assaulting Cassie, captioning it with biting sarcasm. "Now I'm sure Puffy didn't do it. He is innocent, and this proves nothing." This is what his lawyer's gonna say. God help us all. His post went viral as 50 Cent mockingly implied that the video evidence speaks for itself despite any denial. In a follow-up post, 50 Cent reposted Diddy's past public statement denying all wrongdoing, writing, "The lie detector test determined that was a lie," a blunt declaration of disbelief in Combs' innocence. Aubrey O'Day, a singer and former member of Danity Kane, a girl group Combs mentored, who has previously hinted at Combs' misconduct, tweeted, "The picture is getting a lot more clear for you all, I can imagine." She urged prayers to all his victims, Cassie, Kim, and others, explicitly naming Cassie and the late Kim Porter, Combs' ex who died in 2018, as individuals who suffered because of Combs. O'Day's pointed comments carried weight. She had firsthand experience working with Combs and had been waiting for this moment of public vindication. On Instagram Live, O'Day grew emotional discussing the trial, saying, "I feel free to tell my truth now because Cassie had the courage to tell hers." Other artists chimed in. Singer Mary J. Blige, a longtime friend of both Combs and Cassie, carefully stated, "I'm praying for everyone's healing," which many took as a subtle show of support for Cassie. Female rappers like Megan Thee Stallion and Latto tweeted heart emojis and number "I stand with Cassie," signaling solidarity. Actress and Me Too advocate Rose McGowan wrote, "Cassie Ventura is a hero. What she did today, facing her abuser and laying bare the truth, is incredibly brave. Believe women, believe survivors." The public reaction on social media was overwhelmingly supportive of Cassie. Fans expressed outrage at Combs, some burning their Sean John apparel or Bad Boy Records memorabilia in protest videos. Others shared clips of Cassie's old music performances captioned with messages like, "We love you, Cassie, stay strong." There was a palpable sense that Cassie's testimony had not only swayed those in the courtroom, but it also opened the eyes of the public to long whispered allegations about Combs' behavior. In many ways, it felt reminiscent of watershed moments in other celebrity abuse cases, a mixture of shock, empathy for the victim, and reevaluation of the accused's legacy. Even some of Combs' industry allies went quiet or issued cautious statements. A representative for Bad Boy Records said the label was deeply disturbed by the allegations and supports victims of abuse, a notable departure from the staunch defense they'd maintained earlier. Revolt TV, a network owned by Combs, conspicuously ran a segment highlighting the trial's key points without any spin, as if preparing to distance the brand from its founder. Outside the court, one could sense a shift in the air, a recognition that this trial, and Cassie's testimony especially, was a cultural reckoning. As a renowned women's rights attorney who is not involved in the case said on MSNBC that in the evening, "What we saw today was the power imbalance of the music industry laid bare. A young woman, barely 20 when she met him, was groomed and abused by one of the most powerful men in entertainment. It's taken her this long to be heard, but thank God she's being heard now." She added that Cassie's courage may empower other survivors tied to this case or others to come forward. Indeed, noting that multiple other civil suits have recently been filed against Combs by different accusers, emboldened by Cassie's initial lawsuit and the criminal investigation. As Day 3 coverage hit the nightly news, the severity of the trial was the headline. Cassie Ventura tells court Diddy raped and terrorized her, one network declared, summarizing the day's most explosive revelations. The consensus was clear. Cassie's testimony had dramatically strengthened the prosecution's case. If believed, her account establishes Combs as the central figure of a criminal enterprise that engaged in sex trafficking, physical abuse, and intimidation to maintain control over victims. It was a far cry from the defense's opening claim that any group sex was merely consensual swingers lifestyle fun. For Sean Combs, the stakes could not be higher. He has pleaded not guilty on all counts and has been held in custody awaiting trial. If convicted on the most serious charges, the 55-year-old mogul faces a potential life sentence in federal prison. Day 3's testimony undoubtedly made that outcome more likely in the eyes of many observers. Combs' defense team, led by attorney Tenny Garagos, now faces the daunting task of cross-examining Cassie, a witness who remained poised and consistent even while recounting unspeakable trauma. Legal pundits predicted that the defense might attempt to attack Cassie's credibility by referencing the settlement or any inconsistencies, but that's like trying to fight a tidal wave with a teaspoon, one analyst quipped, given how compelling she was on direct. As the sun set on Day 3, the courthouse steps were abuzz. Clusters of people, so from law students to activists to fans, lingered, discussing Cassie's testimony in hushed, respectful tones. Many felt they had witnessed not just a pivotal moment in this trial, but a pivotal moment in the broader conversation about abuse in the entertainment industry. It's like the Harvey Weinstein trial all over again, but music industry, one observer remarked. Cassie's basically the key witness who's pulling back the curtain. In the coming days, the trial will continue to unfold with cross-examinations and additional witnesses, including potentially former employees and other women with similar allegations. But Day 3 will be remembered as Cassie Ventura's day, the day she stood up in federal court, recounted her truth of terror and survival, and by doing so, empowered a wave of public support. It was a day of justice in action, the outcome still uncertain, but the truth unmistakably spoken. And as everyone left the courthouse, one thing was clear. Cassie's voice, silenced and suppressed for so long, was finally heard loud and clear.